The Vorthak battlecruiser Silverspine hung in the void like a predator, coiled in shadow, its angular hull drinking in the starlight without reflection. Commander Vorgul flexed his talons against the command throne, the dark steel plating of the bridge, humming beneath him with the low, predatory thrum of active weapon cores. His third eyelids flicked sideways, adjusting the tactical overlay that painted the system in harsh silver-purple vectors. There, drifting like a wounded animal, was their prey. The human vessel designation TCS Resolute was a pitiful thing by Vorthak standards, a boxy, inelegant construct of primitive alloys. Its propulsion signatures flickered erratically, suggesting damaged engines. No energy shielding, no spinal, mounted plasma lances, just a handful of crude projectile turrets that wouldn't even scratch the Silverspine's armor. Vorgul exhaled through his nasal slits, the scent of ozone and combat stims thick in the recycled air. This was why the High Command had dismissed them. "Scan complete," hissed Gromnock, the ship's scientist, cast, his violet, accented carapace twitching as data streams pulsed across his console. Minimal threat assessment. Their reactor output is barely sufficient for life support, let alone combat. Their crew appears to be in distress. Biometrics indicate elevated stress levels, erratic movement patterns. Vorgul's mandibles clicked in amusement. Of course they were distressed. The humans had stumbled into Vorthak space-blind and unprepared, their ship limping from some prior skirmish. They were weak, helpless. "Open a channel," Vorgul commanded, his voice a graveled growl. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing the human commander, Major Maya Lee. She was smaller than he expected, her uniform singed at the edges, dark circles under her eyes. A predator would have smelled fear, but her voice, when she spoke, was steady. "Vorthak vessel. This is Major Lee of the Terran colonial ship Resolute. We've sustained heavy damage, requesting assistance." Vorgul cut her off with a derisive snort. "Assistance?" His talons drummed against the armrest. "You trespass in sovereign space with a vessel barely fit for scrap. You are in no position to request anything." Lee's jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. "We didn't choose this vector. Our navigation systems were compromised. We mean no hostility." Gromnock leaned in whispering, "Their reactor is leaking radiation. They won't survive another jump." Vorgul's spines flexed in satisfaction. The humans were cornered, desperate, perfect. "Lower your shields," he commanded. Lee hesitated. "We don't have shields." Vorgul's amusement deepened. "Even better. Then prepare to be boarded." The moment the transmission cut, the Silverspine's boarding pods launched, sleek metallic projectiles streaking toward the human ship like knives thrown at a bound victim. Vorgul watched through the tactical feed as the breaching teams, elite Vorthak warriors clad in gunmetal exosuits, sliced through the Resolute's hull with violet plasma cutters. Inside, the humans scrambled like panicked prey. Thermal signatures showed them retreating deeper into the ship, their movements frantic, pathetic. Gromnock's mandibles twitched in unease. "Commander, their retreat pattern is unusual. They're not fleeing randomly, they're hurting our teams." Vorgul dismissed the concern with a flick of his claws. "They're trapped, nothing more." But then the first boarding pod's feed cut out, then the second, then the third. Static hissed across the comms, punctuated by bursts of gunfire. Not plasma, but the sharp percussive cracks of human ballistic weapons. Then, a new voice crackled over the channel. "Vorthak vessel," growled Sergeant Thomas Woods, his tone dark, with something that wasn't fear. It was anticipation. "You should have scanned more than just our reactor." The Resolute's hull plating suddenly detonated, not outward, but inward, collapsing in a controlled implosion that swallowed the remaining boarding teams whole. And then the human ship's engines flared to life, not damaged, not failing. Perfectly operational, Vorgul's spines stood rigid as the Resolute pivoted, its crude turrets locking onto the Silverspine with terrifying precision. The humans hadn't been helpless. They'd been waiting, and now the hunt had reversed. Section Fae. Boarding protocol. The Silver Spine's bridge flickered with emergency lighting, casting jagged violet shadows across the command deck. Vorgul's claws dug into the armrests of his command throne as the human warship Resolute, supposedly crippled, supposedly helpless, rotated on its axis with predatory grace. Its hull plating, once appearing battered and fragile, now gleamed under the Silver Spine's tactical scans, revealing layers of reactive armor webbed with dormant energy conduits. They let us think we had them. The realization slithered through Vorgul's mind like a blade between ribs. Across the deck, Gromnock's cranial spines flared in agitation, his four-fingered hands darting over the sensor array. Their reactor signatures, his voice hitched. They were masking their output. That ship isn't running at Fae, it's a proximity alert, shrieked. The Resolute's railgun turrets, crude, primitive things the Vorthak had dismissed as relics, unfolded from their recessed housings. Magnetic coils hummed to life, charging with a sound like a storm gathering its fury. Vorgul's secondary eyelids snapped shut for a fraction of a second. An instinctive flinch. He had seen human weapons before. Ballistics, chemical explosives, tools of a young, violent species still clawing its way up the technological ladder. The first railgun round struck the Silver Spines forward, shields with the force of a dying star. The impact sent a seismic shudder through the deck, nearly toppling Gromnock from his station. The shield harmonics spiked into the red, their silver-purple barrier flaring like a wounded beast before stabilizing. Direct hit on Sector 7. A tactical officer barked. Shields holding at Fae. Vorgul exhaled. A single shot shouldn't have. The Resolute fired again. Not in salvos, not in bursts. A rhythm, a timed, relentless hammerfall of tungsten slugs. Each one striking the exact same point on the Silver Spine's shields, with machinic precision. The shield integrity percentage ticked downward. Fae, 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 as the humans methodically carved through their defenses, like a knife through flesh. Gromnock's voice was a strangled hiss. They're not just firing, they're calibrating, learning our shield frequency harmonics with each shot. Vorgul's blood ran cold. Human weapons weren't supposed to adapt. Then the comms crackled again, not the human sergeant this time, but a new voice, utterly devoid of mercy. Vorthak vessel Silver Spine. Major Maya Lee's tone was the quiet before detonation. You have boarded a Terran warship without provocation. You have fired upon unarmed escape pods. You have violated the Articles of War. A pause. The Resolute's engines flared brighter. This is your only chance to stand down. Vorgul's claws flexed. The Articles of War were a human construct, a naive attempt to impose rules upon the void. The Vorthak Dominion had no such restrictions. Victory was all that mattered. He opened his mouth to order the plasma lances to fire, when the Resolute's ventral bay doors slid open, not for missiles, not for drones, for boarding pods, human ones. Gromnock's sensor screen lit up with warnings. They're launching at us? Vorgul's spines locked rigid. No species was that suicidal. Boarding actions were death sentences. Even the Vorthak only attempted them with overwhelming numbers. And even then, casualties were catastrophic. Yet the humans weren't just boarding. They were doing it mid-battle. The first pod struck the Silver Spine's hull with a reverberating clang, its armored tip drilling through the outer plating like a bullet through rotten wood. The second hit 3 seconds later, then the third. Then the internal security feeds lit up with movement. Vorgul's screen flickered to the cargo bay cameras, just in time to see the first human emerge from their pod. Not in a pressurized suit, not in heavy armor, but in light combat gear, their face exposed, save for a thin oxygen mask. Sergeant Thomas Woods rolled his shoulders, hefted a weapon that looked more like a handheld cannon than a rifle, and smiled. "All right, boys," he muttered, his voice carrying over the open comms. "Let's show these lizards how Terrans clear a room." The feed cut to static as the humans opened fire. Not with plasma, not with energy bolts, with explosive rounds. The Silver Spine's internal sensors registered the detonations. Not just gunfire, but shaped charges, breaching charges, weapons designed not just to kill but to reshape the battlefield. Bulkheads collapsed. Hallways became kill zones. The humans moved like a single organism, flanking, suppressing, advancing with a coordination that made Vorthak's swarm tactics look like the flailing of hatchlings. Vorgul's claws trembled. This wasn't a boarding action, it was an infection, and his ship was the host. The Silver Spine had been designed for war. Every corridor, every bulkhead, every weapons array forged with the brutal efficiency of Vorthak military doctrine. It was a fortress of dark steel and violet plasma conduits, a predator among the stars. But now it bled. Alarms shrieked through the ship's neural network, pulsing silver-purple warnings across every display. Vorgul's command throne vibrated beneath him as another explosion rocked the lower decks. His secondary claws flexed against the armrests, the edges scoring deep grooves into the metal. This should not be happening. The humans were supposed to be prey. Yet here they were, carving through his ship like surgeons with a scalpel made of detonations. Gromnock's talons danced across the holographic display, pulling up the last visual feed before the humans had severed the surveillance systems. The image flickered, grainy, distorted, but the horror was unmistakable. The human soldiers moved wrong, not in the rigid, synchronized formations of the Vorthak legions, not in the mindless swarms of the Krix hive, fleets. They flowed like liquid, breaking apart and reforming with eerie precision. One moment, they were stacked against a bulkhead, silent as shadows. The next, they were everywhere, flanking, suppressing, vanishing into blind spots. The ship's own sensors couldn't track, and their weapons. Gromnock's frill flattened against his skull. The humans weren't just firing bullets. They were firing architecture. Shaped charges collapsed entire corridors into kill boxes. Magnetic mines adhered to the ceiling, detonating downward in controlled eruptions of shrapnel. Even their sidearms were monstrous compact launchers that spat microgrenades, each one calibrated to rupture Vorthak armor at the molecular level. A new alert flashed. Deck 7, breach detected. Gromnock's secondary heart stuttered. That was impossible. Deck 7 was a labyrinth of reinforced bulkheads and automated sentry turrets. No boarding party should have been able to. Then he saw it. The humans hadn't breached the defenses, they had ignored them. Sensor logs showed a single figure, Major Maya Lee, planting a device on the outer hull. No explosive, no plasma cutter, just a small humming cylinder that emitted a frequency the Silver Spine systems registered as harmless, until the hull melted, not from heat, not from force, from resonance. The alloy destabilized, its atomic bonds unraveling like thread under a blade. Lee stepped through the gap, her boots clicking against the deck, as casually as if she were entering her own quarters. Behind her, the hull reformed, sealing shut. Gromnock's blood ran cold. This wasn't warfare. This was sorcery. Vorgul snarled, his spines flaring in rage. "Deploy the Exo Legion," he commanded, his voice a guttural growl through the ship's comms. "Flush them out, burn them." A chorus of affirmations echoed back. Not the silence of obedience, the silence of absence. Vorgul's claws tightened. No response. He pulled up the Exo Legion's vitals. Every single one was offline. No distress signals, no combat logs, just gone. Then, from the shadows of the command deck's ventilation shaft, a voice whispered through the static of an open channel. "You should have stayed in deep space, Lizard." Vorgul whirled, just in time to see Sergeant Thomas Woods step out of the darkness, his rifle already leveled. The last thing the Vorthak commander registered was the human smile, and then the world turned to fire. Section Fae. First Blood, the Vorthak Exo Legion had been the pride of their military elite warriors encased in reinforced exosuits. their bodies augmented with silver-purple neural boosters that turned them into living siege engines. They were bred for war, their very genetics spliced with predator instincts, their reflexes honed in the zero-gravity slaughterhouses of Vorthak training arenas. They had never lost a boarding action. Gromnak watched the security feeds with mounting horror as the humans moved through the ship's corridors like ghosts. They didn't fight like soldiers, they fought like butchers. The first squad of exo-legionaries had rounded a corner, their plasma casters humming, only to find the corridor empty. Then the ceiling collapsed, not from explosives, from acid. A black, viscous liquid ate through the metal, plating like fire through paper, and before the warriors could react, human figures dropped into their midst, blades flashing. Gromnak had seen Vorthak armor withstand plasma bursts, deflect railgun rounds, shrug off kinetic impacts. But these blades, monomolecular edges, forged from some nightmare alloy, sheared through their defenses like they weren't even there. The humans didn't just kill them, they dismantled them. One warrior, his exosuits, chestplate split open, managed to trigger his emergency beacon. The last thing his helmet cam transmitted was a human soldier, Sergeant Thomas Woods, standing over him, pressing a boot onto his throat. The human's eyes were cold, unreadable. Then the feed cut to static. Vorgul's command deck was supposed to be impenetrable. Reinforced bulkheads, automated sentry turrets, biometric locks that would incinerate any intruder not keyed to Vorthak DNA. None of it mattered. The humans didn't breach the doors. They didn't hack the systems. They didn't even fight their way in. They just appeared. One moment, the deck was secure. The next, the air itself seemed to fracture, a ripple of distorted space shimmering like heat haze. And then the humans were there, rifles raised, their armor coated in the blood of his warriors. Vorgul had faced death before. He had dueled champions of a dozen species, had led fleets into battles where survival was a statistical impossibility. But this was different. The humans didn't gloat, didn't demand surrender, didn't even speak. They just killed. His guards fell before they could even raise their weapons, their bodies jerking as high-caliber rounds punched through their spines. The sentry turrets swiveled, then exploded, their power cores detonating in perfect synchronization, as if the humans had known exactly where to shoot. And then, from the smoke, Sergeant Wood stepped forward, his rifle still smoking. Vorgul snarled, his claws unsheathing, his combat augments flooding his veins with stimulants. He would die like a warrior. Woods didn't give him the chance. The human's finger tightened on the trigger, and the last thing Vorgul saw was the muzzle flash. Gromnak had hidden, a scientist, not a soldier. He had no illusions about his chances in combat. So when the humans stormed the command deck, he had slipped into a maintenance crawl space, his breath shallow, his heart hammering. He expected them to hunt him down, to drag him out and execute him like the others. Instead, the ship's comms crackled to life. Vorthak vessel, this is Major Maya Lee of the Terran Marine Corps. The voice was calm, almost polite. Your commander is dead. Your exo-legion is gone. Your ship is ours. You have 30 seconds to surrender. After that, we stop taking prisoners. Gromnak's hands shook. This wasn't war. This was extermination, and the humans weren't even trying yet. Section Fey. The trap springs. Gromnak's claws scraped against the crawlspace walls as he curled tighter into the shadows. The stench of ionized metal and spilled coolant filled the cramped passage, but he dared not move. Outside, the rhythmic thud of armored boots echoed through the ruined command deck. Human boots. Not the heavy, deliberate march of Vorthak shock troops, but something lighter, faster. Predatory. The scientist's secondary eyelids flickered shut as his neural implant replayed the last moments before the slaughter. Vorgul's final stand. The humans' merciless shot. The way their boarding teams moved. Not like soldiers, but like pack hunters. Every motion precise, every kill efficient. No wasted energy. No grand declarations, just death. delivered in silence. A tremor ran through the deck plating. Somewhere deep in the ship's bowels, another explosion detonated. Human breaching charges. No doubt. They weren't just taking the bridge. They were dismantling the vessel, system by system. Gromnock's data feed flickered with damage reports. Life support failing in Sector Fey weapons. Control offline. The plasma core destabilizing. The Stormclaw wasn't just being captured, it was being erased. A new sound. A whisper of servos. The faintest hum of powered armor idling. Just beyond the crawl space hatch. Gromnock froze. The humans knew. Major Maya Lee crouched beside the access panel, her HUD painting the interior in thermal blues and reds. One heat signature, pulsing erratically. Fear or injury? Maybe both. The Vorthak scientist, not a fighter, smart enough to hide, smart enough to be useful. She gestured silently to Sergeant Woods. He nodded, shifting his grip on his rifle, not to fire, to intimidate. Lee tapped the panel's release. The hatch slid open with a hiss. Gromnock recoiled as violet emergency lighting spilled into the crawlspace, framing the human silhouette. Her armor wasn't like Vorthak design. No jagged edges, no ostentatious blades, just matte, black plating, scarred from combat. The Terran Marine Corps insignia stamped above her heart. Her visor was up. She was smiling. "Dr. Gromnock," she said, her voice almost conversational. "You've got two choices." She held up a gloved hand, counting off. "One, you come out now, and we talk like civilized beings." A pause, the smile didn't waver. "Two, we flood this compartment with neurotoxin and scrape what's left of you off the walls." Woods tilted his rifle slightly. A quiet click as he switched to incendiary rounds. Gromnock's throat tightened. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a demonstration. The Vorthak scientist emerged slowly, his four, jointed limbs trembling. Lee didn't move to restrain him, didn't need to. The message was clear: run, and you die. Gromnock's gaze darted across the command deck, or what was left of it. The walls were scorched from plasma burns, consoles shattered by gunfire. The bodies of Vorgul's warriors lay where they'd fallen, their silver-purple armor punctured by human rounds. No ceremony, no respect, just efficiency and the humans. They were everywhere, not just on the bridge, not just in the halls. Their signals blipped across the Stormclaw's internal sensors like a virus, spreading through every corridor, every access point. Some moved in teams, clearing rooms. Others worked alone, planting charges or slicing into data terminals with hacking tools Gromnock didn't recognize. This wasn't a boarding action, it was an infestation. Lee followed his stare. "First time seeing Terran breach protocols?" she asked, amused. "We don't believe in secured zones. If we're on your ship, it's our ship." She leaned in. "And right now, Doctor, you're the only reason your crew's still breathing." Gromnock's crest spines flattened. A threat, a bargaining chip. Humans didn't take prisoners unless they wanted something. And what they wanted was him. Woods watched the alien scientist's reaction with detached interest. The Vorthak were proud, arrogant, even. But this one was smart. He could see the calculations flickering behind those yellow eyes, weighing survival against loyalty, fear against defiance. It wouldn't matter. The Major had already won. Lee tapped her wrist display, and the Stormclaw's main view screen flickered to life. Not a transmission, not a surrender demand. A live feed, the Vorthak fleet. What was left of it hung in the void like broken toys. Ships burned, escape pods drifted, and at the center of it all, the human dreadnought Iron Resolve loomed, its railgun batteries humming with charged energy. Gromnock made a sound like a choked hiss. Lee's smile turned sharp. "Your friends out there," she said softly, "they thought we were helpless." The screen zoomed in on the Iron Resolve's primary weapon, a monstrous coil of superconducting alloy, glowing white, hot. Big mistake. The silence in the Stormclaw's command chamber was absolute. Gromnok, the Vorthak scientist, stood frozen, his silver-purple carapace plates twitching in involuntary distress. His claws flexed against the smooth metal of the console, scraping faint grooves into the alloy. The live feed before him was not just a tactical display. It was annihilation made manifest. The human dreadnought Iron Resolve dominated the screen, its angular hull a brutalist monument to war. Unlike the sleek, predatory designs of Vorthak warships, this vessel was dense, layered in overlapping armor, plating that shimmered with heat dispersion fields. Its primary railgun, a monstrous coil of superconducting alloy, pulsed with white-hot energy, the magnetic containment fields humming at frequencies that made Gromnok's inner ear vibrate in discomfort. And then there were the wrecks. The remnants of the Vorthak fleet drifted in broken formations, their silver-purple hulls cracked open like eggshells. Escape pods flickered weakly, their emergency beacons broadcasting automated distress signals into the void. No one was coming for them. Gromnok's mind raced, parsing the implications. The humans had let them think they were cornered. They had allowed the Vorthak to commit their forces, to overextend, to believe victory was inevitable. And now, the Iron Resolve was not just a warship, it was a statement. Major Maya Lee watched the aliens' reaction with cold satisfaction. She had seen this before. The moment when an enemy realized the depth of their miscalculation, the Vorthak had assumed humanity's technology was crude, their tactics predictable. They had dismissed human resilience as mere stubbornness, their adaptability as desperation. A fatal error. Lee's fingers danced across her wrist display, and the feed shifted, zooming in on the Iron Resolve's secondary batteries. Plasma lances cycled to full charge, their violet cores flickering in sync with the dreadnought's reactor heartbeat. Gromnok's mandibles twitched. His voice was a rasp, the translator struggling with the harmonics of his disbelief. You lured us. Lee didn't answer. She didn't need to. The screen flickered again, this time displaying a tactical overlay. The Iron Resolve wasn't alone. Dozens of human warships, previously hidden behind sensor, scattering nebula clouds, now burned toward the battlefield, their engines flaring like miniature suns. Gromnok's spines flattened against his back in instinctive submission. Sergeant Thomas Woods, standing at parade, rest beside Lee, allowed himself a grim smirk. The Vorthak had thought they were hunting prey. They had never been the hunters. Humanity's greatest weapon had never been its ships, its railguns, or its plasma lances. It was their patience. And now, the trap was sprung. The Iron Resolve's railgun discharged. The universe held its breath. The railgun's discharge carved a silent scar through the void, a hypersonic lance of tungsten and fury. It struck the lead Vorthak cruiser like the fist of an angry god, punching through its layered armor as if it were wet parchment. The impact sent a ripple of violet plasma fire cascading through the ship's innards, gutting it from within. Secondary explosions bloomed in its wake, casting jagged shadows across the battlefield. Gromnok's claws dug into the command console, his neural interface flickering with damage reports. His mind, usually a fortress of cold logic, reeled. This wasn't a battle. This was annihilation. The human fleet. Where had they come from? Advanced in perfect formation, their engines burning with the steady, relentless glow of stars. Their ships were smaller than Vorthak dreadnoughts, but they moved with terrifying precision, weaving through the debris of their first kill like wolves, circling wounded prey. Vorgul's voice crackled over the comms, distorted by interference. Fall back. Regroup at. The transmission cut off as another railgun round found its mark. Gromnok's secondary heart stuttered. The humans had known. They had let the Vorthak think they were weak, let them believe their crude technology and reckless tactics made them easy prey. And now, the trap was sprung. Sergeant Thomas Woods watched the destruction unfold through the Iron Resolve's viewport, his expression unreadable. Beside him, Major Maya Lee stood motionless, her fingers resting lightly on the tactical display. She didn't gloat, didn't smile. There was no triumph in her eyes, only the quiet certainty of a predator that had already won. Woods remembered the briefing. "They think we're animals," Lee had said, her voice calm. "Good, let them." Now the Vorthak were learning the truth. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't their weapons. It wasn't their ships, their armor, or even their terrifying adaptability. It was their patience, the willingness to wait, to bleed, to let the enemy believe they had the upper hand, right up until the moment they didn't. The Vorthak had thought themselves the hunters. They had never been anything but prey. Gromnock's console lit up with another warning, a proximity alert. He turned just in time to see the human boarding pod slam into the Iron Resolve's flank, their magnetic clamps locking onto the hull with mechanical finality. The last thing he saw before the lights died was Sergeant Woods stepping forward, his rifle humming to life. The darkness didn't last. Gromnock's vision swam back into focus, his neural interface flickering with damage reports. The Iron Resolve groaned around him, its silver-purple energy cores sputtering like dying stars. The air smelled of scorched metal and ionized plasma, thick with the acrid tang of ruptured coolant lines. He had expected death. Instead, he found silence. The command deck was a graveyard of flickering screens and sparking conduits. Vorthak warriors lay slumped over their stations, some still twitching from the neural shock of the human boarding pod's EMP burst. Others didn't move at all. Gromnock's claws dug into the console as he forced himself upright. His carapace ached where the feedback surge had burned through his armor's insulation. He had studied human warfare, their tactics, their weapons, their limitations. He had been wrong. A shadow moved in the ruined corridor beyond the shattered blast doors. Gromnock's spine stiffened. The humans didn't march. They didn't announce their presence with the rhythmic thud of armored boots or the mechanical whine of powered exoskeletons. They slid through the wreckage, silent as specters, their blackened combat suits absorbing the dim emergency lighting. Sergeant Woods stepped into the chamber first, his rifle still humming with residual charge. Behind him, more figures emerged. Human soldiers, their visors reflecting the dying glow of the Vorthak consoles. Gromnock's secondary heart pounded. He had seen human prisoners before. He had watched them fight in the arenas of Carxus, snarling and bleeding, and refusing to die even when their bones were shattered. But this was different. These humans weren't cornered beasts. They were hunters. Woods tilted his head, studying the fallen Vorthak with detached curiosity. His voice, when it came, was calm, almost conversational. "Still breathing, huh?" Gromnock's translator parsed the words a second too late. By then, the human was already moving, his rifle snapping up. A hand caught Wood's wrist. Major Lee stepped into the light, her armor streaked with coolant burns and scorch marks. She didn't look at Gromnock, not yet. Her gaze was fixed on Woods, her grip unyielding. "Stand down, Sergeant." Woods exhaled through his teeth but lowered the weapon. Lee finally turned to Gromnock. The Vorthak scientist had faced death before. He had stood in the presence of warlords and high commanders, their auras thick with the promise of violence. None of them had looked at him like this. Lee's eyes were cold, calculating, not the fury of a predator, the patience of a farmer surveying a field before the harvest. "You're the one who studied us," she said. It wasn't a question. Gromnock's throat tightened. He had read every intercepted human transmission, every action report from their wars. He had known them, or so he thought. Lee tilted her head, studying him the way a xenobiologist might examine a dissected specimen. "Tell me," she murmured, "what did you learn?" Gromnock's claws flexed. His people had ruled the stars for centuries. They had broken empires, crushed rebellions, erased entire species from the galactic record. The humans had let them think they were winning. Lee smiled. It was the most terrifying thing Gromnak had ever seen. Behind her, the Iron Resolve's last functioning screen flickered to life, displaying a single line of text, a transmission from the human fleet, broadcast on every Vorthak channel. Weapons hot, ready to fire on your mark. Lee didn't glance at it. She already knew. Gromnak understood. Then, this wasn't a battle. It was a demonstration. And humanity had just shown its teeth. The silence on the bridge of the Iron Resolve was absolute. Gromnak's respiratory vents flared, his neural tendrils twitching as they processed the transmission flickering on the screen. The words burned into his vision, searing through layers of tactical analysis, centuries of Vorthak military doctrine, the unshakable certainty that his species had mastered war. Weapons hot, ready to fire on your mark. A simple phrase, a death sentence. His claws scraped against the command console, leaving deep gouges in the dark steel. The humans had let them board. They had allowed the Vorthak to believe they were cornered, that their ship was crippled, that their defiance was nothing more than the last, desperate thrashing of a dying species. Now, the truth unfolded before him like the petals of a carnivorous bloom. Major Lee hadn't moved. She stood before him, unarmed, her posture relaxed, her dark eyes reflecting the violet glow of the Vorthak emergency lighting. There was no fear in her, no hesitation, only the quiet, terrible patience of a predator who had already won. Gromnak's neural interface pulsed with incoming data, scattered reports from the fleet, panicked transmissions from the other boarding parties. The human ships weren't retreating, they weren't surrendering, they were repositioning. A cold realization slithered through his mind. The Iron Resolve wasn't a warship, it was bait. Lee exhaled, slow and deliberate, as if savoring the moment. "You studied us," she said, her voice soft, almost conversational. "You thought you understood." Gromnak's mandibles clenched. He had dissected human tactics, analyzed their history, their wars, their brutal, relentless adaptability. He had watched them fight among themselves, watched them claw their way from the mud of their homeworld to the stars, and he had dismissed them as reckless, unpredictable. The humans hadn't been reckless. They had been practicing outside the shattered viewport, the void-twisted pinpricks of light flared human vessels, their engines burning crimson as they maneuvered into formation, not a retreat, a firing solution. Gromnak's neural feed erupted with warnings. The Vorthak fleet was scrambling, their commanders barking orders, their ships turning broadside to unleash their silver-purple plasma lances. Too late, the humans didn't fight like the Vorthak. They didn't duel with honor, didn't broadcast their intentions in ceremonial challenges. They ambushed. The first railgun strike hit the Vorthak flagship like a god's hammer. The projectile, a tungsten spear accelerated to a fraction of light speed, punched through the battleship's layered armor as if it were paper. Secondary explosions rippled through its hull, violet energy cores detonating in chain reactions, turning the mighty vessel into a funeral pyre. Gromnak's neural tendrils recoiled from the sensory overload. His people had built their empire on superior firepower, on the unbreakable might of their warships, their impenetrable shields. The humans had built better. Lee tilted her head, watching him. "You thought we were weak because we didn't fight like you," she murmured. "But weakness isn't in the method, it's in the mind." Another impact, another Vorthak ship shattered. The human fleet moved with terrifying synchronicity, their railguns firing in staggered volleys, their plasma lances carving through armor like scalpels. The Iron Resolve's last functioning console beeped. A new transmission, not from the human fleet, from Earth. Gromnak's neural interface translated the message automatically, the words imprinting themselves into his consciousness with chilling clarity. "Cease hostilities, stand down, or be erased. No demands, no negotiations." A statement of fact. Lee didn't smile this time. She didn't need to. The message wasn't for her, it was for him. And as the last of the Vorthak fleet burned in the void, Gromnak understood humanity hadn't just won the battle. They had rewritten the rules of war, Section Fey, fleet movements. The silence that followed Earth's transmission was thicker than the void itself. Gromnock's neural interface pulsed with the afterimage of those words. Cease hostilities, stand down, or be erased. Burned into his mind like a brand. No rhetoric, no posturing, just cold, unassailable fact. Across the ruined bridge of the Iron Resolve, Vorthak crew members stood frozen, their silver-purple armor dulled by emergency lighting. Their spines, usually rigid with pride, lay flat against their backs in instinctive submission. Even Vorgul, the hardened commander who had once boasted of crushing human colonies in a single campaign, did not move. His talons flexed against the armrest of his command throne, but he did not rise. Major Maya Lee watched them all with the patience of a predator who had already won. She didn't gloat, didn't sneer. She simply stood there, her human frame unremarkable beside the towering Vorthak, yet radiating something far more dangerous than physical might. Gromnock's mind raced, reassembling the battle in flashes of fractured data. The human fleet's maneuvers, not the brute force charges of Vorthak war doctrine, but something fluid, alive. Their ships had moved like a pack, feinting and striking in perfect unison, their railgun salvos timed to the millisecond. Even their retreats had been traps, luring Vorthak vessels into kill zones where plasma lances carved through their armor like surgical instruments. And then there was the real horror. The humans had let the Vorthak think they were winning. Gromnock's mandibles twitched. The realization was a blade in his gut. The initial skirmishes, human ships falling back, their formations breaking, had been a ruse, a performance. They had allowed the Vorthak to commit, to overextend, to believe in their own superiority. And then, with a single coordinated strike, the humans had dismantled them. Sergeant Thomas Woods stepped forward, his armored boots clicking against the deck. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The scars on his face, the way his fingers rested near his sidearm, these were the language of a soldier who had survived battles the Vorthak couldn't fathom. Vorgul finally broke the silence. You baited us. His voice was raw, stripped of its usual arrogance. Lee tilted her head. You expected us to fight like you, straightforward, predictable. She gestured to the holographic wreckage of the Vorthak fleet, still drifting in the void. But war isn't about honor, it's about winning. Gromnock's neural interface flickered with incoming data, a final transmission from the surviving Vorthak ships. They were retreating, not regrouping, fleeing. The humans had left them just enough engines to limp home. A mercy that was also a message. We could have killed you all. We chose not to. The implications settled over the bridge, like ash. The Vorthak had come to subjugate a lesser species. Instead, they had been outmaneuvered, outthought, outplayed, and the humans hadn't even needed their full strength to do it. Lee turned toward the view screen, where Earth hung like a blue jewel against the black. Your fleet's movements were broadcast the moment you entered the system, she said. Every ship, every formation, every mistake. Gromnock's blood ran cold. The humans hadn't just been watching, they had been learning. And now, they had rewritten the rules of war. The silence in the Vorthak command bunker was thicker than the radiation shielding. Gromnock's neural tendrils twitched as he parsed the last of the battle data, the silver-purple holoscreens casting jagged shadows across the war table. The humans had left them with more than just their lives. They had left them with questions, and questions, in the Vorthak dominion, were more dangerous than any weapon. Across the room, Vorgul stood motionless, his armored carapace still scorched from the battle. His claws flexed, the sound like shearing metal. He had been bred for war, honed in the crucible of 100 campaigns. And yet, this defeat tasted different. Not the bitter sting of lost honor, but something far worse, the creeping realization that the humans had allowed them to retreat, that they had never been the hunters, only the prey. Gromnock's mind reeled. The humans had played them from the start. their primitive ships, their reckless tactics, all a carefully constructed illusion. The moment the Vorthak fleet had crossed into Sol's gravity, well, they had been dissected. Every formation, every shield frequency, every hesitation in command had been catalogued, analyzed, exploited. And then the humans had struck, not with overwhelming force, but with precision. A single railgun round, fired from beyond sensor range, punching through the flagship's bridge like a needle through flesh. No warning, no declaration. Just death, delivered with terrifying efficiency. Gromnock's neural interface pulsed with the memory of the human commander's voice. Major Lee, standing on the view screen as her fleet dismantled the Vorthak armada. She hadn't gloated, hadn't even raised her voice. She had simply informed them of their defeat. Now, the remnants of the Vorthak fleet limped home, their engines crippled just enough to make the journey agonizingly slow. A message, written in the language of war. You are not a threat. You are a lesson. Vorgul finally turned, his violet ocular implants flickering with something Gromnock had never seen in a Vorthak commander before. They let us live. Vorgul growled, the words scraping against the silence. Gromnock's tendrils coiled tight. That was the true horror, wasn't it? The humans hadn't just defeated them. They had controlled the battle down to the last shot. Every casualty, every retreat vector, every surviving ship had been calculated. And now, the Dominion would have to answer the unthinkable question: what happens when the humans stop holding back? Outside, the distant hum of the surviving fleet's engines vibrated through the bunker's reinforced walls. The sound was wrong, broken. Like the Vorthak's understanding of war, Gromnock exhaled, his respiratory vents hissing. The humans had taught them something today. War wasn't about honor, it was about winning. And the humans had just rewritten the rules. The war room was silent except for the low rhythmic pulse of the Vorthak command core, a sound like a dying heartbeat. Vorgul stood before the tactical holodisplay, his massive frame casting jagged shadows across the silver-purple alloy walls. The data streams flickered before him, replaying the battle in cold, merciless detail. Every ship lost, every miscalculation, every mistake. Gromnock watched from the periphery, his tendrils twitching with involuntary tension. The air smelled of scorched metal and ionized plasma, the aftermath of a battle that should have been a slaughter, just not their slaughter. The humans had left them alive, not out of mercy, not out of weakness, to send a message. The holodisplay froze on the final moments. The human dreadnought Indomitable, its obsidian black hull wreathed in silver fire, hanging motionless above the shattered Vorthak fleet. It hadn't fired. It hadn't pursued. It had simply watched, like a predator assessing wounded prey. Vorgul's claws flexed, the sound of reinforced talons scraping against the command console. His ocular implants dimmed, the violet light retreating into shadow. They could have erased us, he said, his voice a low, grating rumble. Gromnock didn't need scans to confirm it. The humans had held back. Their weapons, those monstrous, asymmetrical horrors, had been calibrated to maim, not annihilate. Their boarding drones had disabled engines, not slaughtered crews. Even their cybernetic shock troops, those nightmare figures clad in blackened exo-plating, had moved with surgical precision, leaving survivors in their wake. The answer coiled in Gromnock's mind, like a venomous serpent. Because they wanted us to see, the Dominion had believed humanity weak, fragile, bound by crude emotions and reckless impulses. But the humans had played the long game, letting the Vorthak think them helpless until the moment they struck, not with brute force, but with calculation. Every engagement, every skirmish, every victory, the Dominion had claimed, had been a feint, a data point in some vast, unfathomable strategy. And now, the truth was laid bare. Gromnock's tendrils tightened around his data slate. The humans hadn't just outmaneuvered them. They had redefined war. Vorgul turned, his massive frame blocking the holodisplay's glow. Their commander, he growled, The one they call Lee. Gromnak exhaled sharply. Major Maya Lee, the architect of this humiliation. Intelligence had dismissed her as another human officer, bound by their primitive codes of honor. They had been wrong. Lee hadn't fought like a warrior. She had fought like a mathematician. Every ship lost, every retreat, every feigned weakness. All variables in an equation that ended with the Vorthak fleet broken and begging for terms. And the Dominion had no answer. Outside, the distant hum of surviving engines trembled through the bunker's walls. The sound was wrong, fractured, like the Vorthak's understanding of the universe. Gromnok's tendrils coiled. The humans had taught them something today. War wasn't about strength, it was about adaptation, and the humans had just proven they were better at it than anyone. The holodisplay flickered once before shutting down, plunging the room into darkness. Somewhere beyond the bunker's reinforced walls, the stars burned cold and indifferent, and the galaxy would never be the same.